when I scroll social media or if I binge watch a show, I don't actually feel more rested after. I don't know. I'd love for you to try it out for yourself. Pay attention to how you feel and see, do I actually feel rejuvenated after? I don't actually feel recharged after that. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. Welcome. Today I want to talk about a really important topic. It's rest. And before you go, I want to say this topic is so essential for ADHD women, especially ADHD women entrepreneurs, especially ADHD women entrepreneurs who still have their regular job while they're building up their side business. I might know something about this. And so I wanted to share my thoughts about the importance of rest. And this came to me because I'm in the middle of a launch for my ADHD Women Entrepreneurs business, as many of you have heard and know. And I also still have my full-time private practice, which I love, and I'm never going to fully leave. I just look forward to going more part-time there as I work with more and more ADHD women. And while I'm in the middle of the launch and still working full-time, I could sense in my body that I needed to slow down. I was like, I feel it coming. I feel it coming. And I was like, no, I just have to do a little more. I have to do a little more. I have to do a little more. And then I got sick. Right? And it's not funny, but I laugh because it's a common pattern. We push and we push and we push until we crash. And then I crashed for like a full 2 days, which is not useful because, I'm self-employed in both of my businesses. And so if I'm not working, I don't have any income coming in, but also like it sucks to be sick and it's hard on our body. So today I want to talk about the importance of rest for us ADHD ladies. First, I want to talk a little bit about how we get drained in the first place. What I notice is that a lot of us are perfectionists and we do way too much. And I have my hypotheses on why I believe that is. I think for sure, a lot of us, especially if we weren't diagnosed until adulthood, have felt like we had to cover up our unsightly ADHD symptoms that we didn't know was actually our ADHD, right? Like the things that people would criticize and shame us for, or judge us for, or roll their eyes, or make little comments, or sometimes not so little comments. And that's fair. We come by that honestly, like, oh gosh, I don't want to get in trouble again or whatever. And so a lot of us learned to work our butts off and have these intense systems and ways of doing things just to try to avoid the constant criticism, the judgment, the shaming, all that stuff. And then even if those external people aren't there anymore doing the shaming, we now have our own internal critics that have took up the project and continue to do that so that we keep working towards perfectionism. I know that's not all ADHDers, but I wanted to say that can be a piece of it. I think even if it's not perfectionism that we tend to be striving for, in some way, a lot of us tend to work really, really hard so that we can avoid that criticism, right? Even if it's not perfectionism, even if we're like, I'm just trying to get shit done, Jen. and we end up working so hard that we end up burning out, crashing, and then not functioning for a while. So I want to talk about how we can bring more balance into our lives so that we're not in this crazy cycle of work my ass off till I crash and then crash. And that's not to say that we won't have high energy days and low energy days, or higher or lower, whatever, those words are subjective. And certainly we do need to follow where our energy is. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm more talking about our tendency to just keep piling more and more on our plates not noticing the impact that's happening. One of the things that a lot of us with ADHD struggle with is interoception. So interoception is the ability to notice your internal cues, your emotions, your body sensations, and be like, hey, I should do something about that. I have that because I've been meditating for like 25 years and practicing yoga for 15. Wow, it's been 15 now. But so I have that interoception, that ability to notice, but I overrid it. I overrided it. I don't know how you say that properly, but I went past it. I felt it. I was like, oh, I need to rest. I can tell I need to rest. And I was like, just a little more, just a little more. And then that was like, not a good idea. So we can talk, if you're in that boat, we can talk about that. Some of it is really trusting that like we know when we need to rest. And for me, in the middle of a launch, I had stuff that had to get done. And it was like, okay, here we go. And sometimes that might happen. But sometimes if we can trust and be like, no, I know what happens when I feel this way, right? And take that break. But I want to talk about how we can find that balance so this isn't happening as much. And one of the things I want to talk about is something called completing the stress response. So when we experience stress, which everyone in this world, I'm pretty sure nowadays experiences stress, especially in the Western world, we experience stress that puts us in our fight or flight response or even our shutdown response regularly, like on a daily basis. There's numerous experiences of that. And so what's happening is we're getting into our fight or flight response, and sometimes we're chronically there, or we're there more than we're really evolutionarily designed to be. The fight or flight response, the shutdown response, those were meant to be like short-term responses when like a tiger was chasing us and we needed to get away. And then we would complete the stress response. I'll talk about how to do that and be done with it. But now we're in those protective responses a lot of the time, right? Like think about it for a moment. How often do you feel safe enough to connect, able to rest and digest, right? And like in the state of flow, maybe even a bit calm. I don't know about you, but I'm like, even as a yoga teacher and someone who meditates and puts a lot of energy into that, I still like find that I have to work on getting connected with that state. And just to be clear, our nervous systems aren't designed to always be in that state. That's not even possible. It's not what we're going for. But what we want to do is be able to, blip into these protective states when we actually need to, and then be able to recover and come back to that ventral vagal state where it's safe enough to connect, rest, and digest. So we're not talking about perfectionism here. It's not, oh, I need to be calm and zen at all times. That's not possible, by the way. As a human, that's not possible. Maybe if you're like a Buddhist monk and you are meditating not around other people, I don't know, that might be possible. But I got to tell you, the moment we come into contact with other people, there's going to be stress and conflict just because none of us are exactly the same, right? We're not going for perfectionism, but what we are going for is being able to notice when we're in those protective responses and then shift ourselves out, which we've worked on in some previous podcast episodes, some recent ones. So I'm not going to repeat that, but also be able to restore our body after being in that stress cycle. Because what happens is when we go into the fight or flight response, our body floods us with adrenaline, noradrenaline, also known as norepinephrine, as well as cortisol to help us fight or flee. But if we don't use that energy to fight or flee, then that gets stuck in our body. Peter Levine did some research on how this gets stuck in the body. He was watching polar bears and he went with a team who was tagging polar bears. So tagging, Tagging. I spell it because my Minnesota accent probably makes it sound like something else. I don't even know what, but they were tagging polar bears where they put the little number on them and track them or whatever. And so he went with the team and just observed. And what they would do is from the air, they would net the polar bear. Then they would tranquilize the polar bear. Then while he was tranquilized, they would put the tag on his ear or wherever. I think it's their ear. And then they would take the net off. And as they were flying away, what Peter Levine noticed is that as the tranquilizers wore off, the polar bears were like fighting, like they were like fighting off their attacker, even though the attacker was gone. they were completing the stress response. They were using that energy that they were flooded with, that they were trapped and couldn't use. So think about that. This happens in our life. We'll be at work and someone makes a side comment or kind of gives us a look, or we check social media on a break and there's like a hater or like a comment that's stings a little bit. And these are just some examples. Or maybe our boss is like, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And we're like, with ADHD, I need to talk to you about something usually means you're in trouble. And if you're self-employed, it might be like, I got to call this insurance company, or you get an email from an insurance company. You're like, oh God. And so whatever it is, we're blipping into this fight or flight response. We're still flooded with that same adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. But what do? I'm doing it right now. We sit. Many of us sit at work. Many of us sit on the couch after work. And I work out. I'm a very active person. I work out for about an hour every day. And then I try and take walks between clients. I used to do it between every client. Now I'm like a few a day and I feel like I've rocked it. But most of us sit. And then we're not completing the stress response. We're not using up that cortisol, noradrenaline. And so what we want to do is complete the stress response. There's 7 ways that I like to talk about that help us complete the stress response. I'll talk about a couple here. One is going to be obvious because of what I shared about the polar bear. It's movement. We need to move our bodies. And I'm not going to get on this big pitch to exercise. I think that exercise would help you. I think why. And some kind of movement. I don't care if you're dancing in your kitchen, if you want to skip around your block or walk around the block. I don't know, dance with your cat, play with your cat, standing though. Try not to sit and just twirl the thing. Take your dog for a walk, whatever you got going on. Play with your kids, not just sitting there though, and they're playing doctor and you're the patient who's laying there, right? Like something active. But when we get movement in our day, we are completing the stress response. So that is the most effective way because it mirrors what fighting or fleeing is movement. There's other ways that work as well. One of them is the breath. And you're like, everyone talks about breathing. We all talk about breathing because it works. And intentional breath. I like to share volcano breathing because it's movement with breath. So it's like a double bang for your buck. And I've shared this before. I'll share it again. So you can do this with me now for a moment. Place your hands together in front of your heart, like your palms on pressing into each other. And as you inhale, reach your arms overhead. And as you exhale, reach your arms down around by your sides and back to center. And you can do that 2 more times. Inhaling, reach up. Exhaling, arms back around by your sides and back to center. One last time. Inhale, reach up. Exhaling, bring your arms down around by your sides and back to center. You can just notice your breath. And I did that a little quick just because we're on the podcast, but if you slow that down and maybe even do it like 5 or 7 breaths, that can really help complete the stress response. Another one is a decent hug. So when we lean in to each other and give a really good, like 20-second, no holds bar hug, that helps complete the stress response. It's not like the half-ass one arm hug or the like quick little one. It's like leaning into each other, not leaning on someone, but mutually hugging each other and breathing together. Speaking of, when we're around another person who's regulated, they can help us co-regulate. Their nervous system, if they're ventral vagal, in that place where they're safe enough to connect, rest, and digest, they can pull us into that and we can pull them into it too. We can also pull each other into the fight or flight response. So there's that. But that's why the hug can really help. And another way that I'll share of the 7 is having a conversation with a loved one. A supportive, meaningful conversation, not one where you're bitching about all the shit, right? Because like that's not going to help. That just stirs you all up again. And that's not completing the stress response, but having a supportive conversation where your feelings are validated and you feel supported. It doesn't have to be about what your day was or the stressor. It can just be a conversation connecting about something you enjoy. So those are 4 ways to complete the stress response. I share at least 3 more in my work with people, but that should get you started. Sometimes if we have too long of a list, then we're like, what were all those again? So movement, breath, a decent hug, and a warm, loving conversation, right? With mutual support and a balance between give and take. Someone who we have a relationship like that with. All right. So that gets us through the completing the stress response. But I also want to talk about the different kinds of rest. There are actually 7 kinds of rest. And I would actually add an additional one, which isn't really rest, but it's something that helps us rejuvenate, something that helps us recharge our battery. And I would add fun. So I was at the cabin with my family over Labor Day weekend, and I don't like jumping into the lake at first because it's cold, and I'm like, oh, I don't want it. And it's fine once you're in, but like the initial jump, I suppose that's true even with a pool, right? You're just like, "Wah." And yet my nieces were there, and my one niece is only 10, and I was like, oh, she'll be fun to play with on this floaty thing we have called a wow. And I made myself jump in, and 2 days in a row, and we played on that wow. We had so much fun trying to stand up and balance and seeing who could balance longer and kind of knocking each other over, like in kind ways, mostly. And laughing when I fell in head over heels right after I'd taken a shower. I know why I took a shower before I went in the lake. Anyway, but it was so much fun. And that fun, probably because it involved laughter, which is actually another way to complete the stress response, was so rejuvenating for me. My heart feels full after that weekend, after that fun. And it wasn't just that. We played Telestrations, which is a fun game as a family, which is lots of laughter and fun and other cards and dice and things like that. So it was just a fun weekend, lots of things. But with ADHD, a lot of times we're so focused on just keeping our shit together, getting our work done, getting our housework done and all that stuff that we're like, I don't have time for that. I'll have fun when I'm caught up. Here's the deal. I'm sure you've heard someone tell you this before, but I don't mean to make this traumatizing, but you will never be caught up. None of us will ever be caught up. There's just way too much to do in the world right now. This whole system of working 40 hours a week was never meant to be also keeping track of your house. Remember, when the 40-hour work week was coming around, that was just for men. The women stayed home and did all the house stuff. But now what's expected is that we all do both. And that's insane. It's just never going to happen, or we're never going to have fun and enjoy life. And to me, when I get to the end of my life, I don't want to be like, damn, I had a clean house. That was fantastic. Or, wow, yeah, I worked 60 hours a week and that was totally worth it. I mean, maybe that's worth it for you. Maybe one of your goals is to, I don't know, be a CEO or CFO of a big company. And then if that's your goal, then maybe, and that makes you happy, then your situation can be very different from mine. But for most of us, I think, especially if we're entrepreneurs and we're listening, we're like, I don't want to work 40 hours a week. That makes no sense with all the other stuff I have to do. Right. But whatever you're doing with that, you're never going to be caught up enough to have fun. You're never going to be caught up enough to go out to lunch with your coworkers. You're never going to be caught. The only ever time I've ever been caught up at work, and I am good at getting tasks done. For someone with ADHD, that is something I do well. But the only time you're really ever going to be caught up is when you switch jobs. It's true. You're never going to get anything done because stuff just gets piled. The same is true with your home. Yeah, okay, you might be caught up when you move until you get into your new house and have to unpack. I know people that it takes years to unpack, which probably means some decluttering is in order, but that's another episode. That's what I should do. I should have like a organizational expert on. I know someone. I'll see if I can get her. But anyway, we're never going to be caught up. So we just have to have the fun anyway, right? I'm in the middle of my lunch and I went and had fun over Labor Day weekend with my family. I had my computer out a couple times, but for no more than an hour total, because I really wanted to just focus on my family and have fun with them. And it was worth it because I came back feeling energized and refreshed and excited and with more ideas and things like that. So fun is a huge type of rest that isn't listed in the traditionally listed 7 types of rest that I find is essential. So the other ones are things that you've probably heard of. One is physical rest. And I think that's the most obvious. We all know we need to sleep. We all know we need to like rest, maybe reading a book. Certainly, there's active rest, like going for a walk or doing some yoga or stretching, getting a massage. But there can also just be resting on the couch. Now, I will say sometimes we might feel rested after watching a movie on the couch. But I don't know about you. When I scroll social media or if I binge watch a show, I don't actually feel more rested after. I don't know. I'd love for you to try it out for yourself. Pay attention to how you feel and see, do I actually feel rejuvenated after? I don't actually feel recharged after that. I do after watching a movie, especially if it's a movie I haven't seen. Like as much as I love Harry Potter, I've seen it so many times now. I don't know. It doesn't really feel like rest. It feels like numbing in some ways. Like checking out. Sometimes it's not. But I'd love for you to check that out and see what kind of rest is true physical rest for you. I would say scrolling on our phones is not. Those screens, the brightness for our eyes is not going to be restful. Your TV, I'd say, depending on what you're watching, you might feel rejuvenated after, but really giving ourselves chances to rest. Yoga, like I said, going for a walk, a massage, other things like that can be really good physical rest as well. Okay, so we've got physical rest down. I want to talk a little bit about mental rest. Now, if you're someone who the moment your head hits the pillow at night, your brain fires up and has some time to think, then you probably need some mental rest. So I'm going to tell you my number one strategy for that is brain dump journaling. The idea comes from Julie Cameron's morning pages, because what I found is when I was doing her morning pages, which is actually to help with creativity, I would write 2 to 3 pages. She says 3, but if I get to 2 or 3, I'm like, yeah, okay. But I write 2 to 3 pages every morning, and that just dumps the junk out of my brain, right? And that creates some mental rest. Meditation is also good for mental rest. Sitting in silence is good for mental rest. Taking breaks at work. If you're using like the Pomodoro method that I've talked about in other times, you do 25 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of rest. Like even getting up to go to the bathroom or fill your water bottle or going for a walk around the block if you have that ability in whatever work you do can really, really help give you that mental rest so your brain gets a break. The other thing I will say, if you're doing a lot of task switching, I think we all know this by now, multitasking is not a thing. And I get it. We have parts of our brain that thinks multitasking is a thing. I have a part of my brain that thinks multitasking is a thing, even though I've seen the data and the science behind how our brains cannot actually multitask. I still have a part that's like, oh, I can totally multitask. Like, I get it. I get that there's a part of you saying that. And what I'm telling you is our brains don't multitask. They switch between tasks, which can be incredibly draining on our brain, requiring even more mental rest. Plus, you should know over time, the more quote unquote multitasking, which is actually task switching that we do, the harder it is on our brain. And it makes it even like harder for us to focus because we get more distracted and we're out of practice on focusing on one thing. So trying to multitask is not good for ADHD, but also it's going to make you need even more mental rest. So something to think about there. Another big one for ADHD is sensory rest. A lot of us are highly sensitive souls. And sometimes we're highly sensitive in different ways, but a lot of us are highly sensitive to noise or light or other people's energy. I don't know, whatever it is. So it's important that we spend time maybe alone or in silence, certainly meditation, maybe certain kinds of yoga could help with this, but certainly time away from screens to give us that rest. This would be a great spot for a bath, right? If you're someone who likes to take a bath, maybe have some essential oils or something like that, like a nice candle. Make sure you're using fire precaution. Things that give our senses a break. So sensory rest is really, really important, especially after we've had an intense sensory experience. So gosh, it's almost a month ago now. I went to the Pink concert, which was just amazing. It was a special treat from my dad to me, my sister, and my niece, but it was awesome and I loved it. But I forgot to bring earplugs, which I always bring earplugs to concerts because it's just so overstimulating. But I forgot. So that weekend, I had to work the Friday after because it was a Thursday night. But that weekend, I did a lot of like alone time. I had other things scheduled that weekend, but I cut down how much I was going to be in different places. I had something scheduled Sunday morning that it completely canceled so that I could have some sensory break, right? And not have to take all that in. Being in nature is another good one for sensory rest because those are the natural sounds that our brains are designed to hear instead of all the synthetic stuff from our phones and our TVs and iPads, whatever else you got going on there. So video games. I don't know. Does anyone play video games? I'm not a video game player. I was big into the Commodore 64 versions of Pac-Man and Frogger. And Pole Position. So when I was in middle school, but if you're a video game player, that, getting a sensory rest from that too is important, right? I definitely recommend a sensory break every night before bed, at least 30 minutes, no screens before bed. Technically, the recommendation is 60. So try and work up to that. I do notice, like last night, I did not do well turning my screens off an hour before bed. I just didn't sleep as well. And it was okay. It wasn't like awful, but I know I sleep so much more deeply when my screens are off before bed. So that sensory rest is super essential. All right. The next kind of rest we're going to talk about is emotional rest. So I think for a lot of us, this means not being around people. But I think it can also be being around people who you can be authentic with, who, when they ask how you are, you can actually respond, actually, I'm feeling frustrated right now, instead of I'm fine, right? It's being able to be authentic and feel safe doing so. And also giving ourselves space to feel our emotions. Journaling can help here. So just giving ourselves that space, connecting with others, getting the emotional support we need is really, really important for emotional rest. So I'm going to really say about that one. The next one we'll talk about is social rest. So this is different depending on if you're an introvert or an extrovert. And a lot of people get what it means to be an introvert or extrovert wrong. So I want to speak to that first. So extroverts tend to get their energy from being around people. Introverts tend to get their energy from being by themselves. And then ambiverts, a little bit of both. So if you're an ambivert, you're going to have to tune in to what you need at any given time to give you energy, right? If you're an extrovert, it's probably easier to notice that I just need to be around some people. I will have so much more social energy. That will be socially restful for you. Whereas to me, I'm a pretty extreme introvert. Even though I'm super outgoing, I am a huge introvert. I get my energy from being alone. So for me, like if I'm exhausted, going out and being around people is my worst nightmare. I can do it, but eventually I get so drained, I'm not functioning well. It's really important to know how you recharge socially, energetically, whether that's with people. I can sometimes recharge one-on-one with people, but a big group is always draining for me, right? So get to know what truly helps you recover socially. And it might be different. There may be times, even as an extrovert, where you're like, I just need to not be around people, right? There are times if I've been isolating too much, sometimes I do need to be around people. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of my own thoughts. So it's not written in stone that as an introvert, you can never connect with others to rest socially. But it's more knowing what you need at any given time. And if you're an introvert, it tends to be alone time. And if you're an extrovert, it tends to be people-y time. Okay. Creative rest is another important kind of rest. Now, if you do something creative for work, then your creative rest is going to look different than creative rest for people who don't have a lot of creativity involved in their work. If you're an accountant or an actuary, I guess when I was an actuary, we had to use some pretty creative solutions, but you're not doing anything. If you're an artist where you're writing or drawing or making music or painting or sculpting, whatever their kinds of artists there are, your creative rest may be going and looking for inspiration with no intention of creating anything. Like taking yourself on an artist date is what Julie Cameron calls it. Like just go out and enjoy a museum for the sole purpose of enjoying it, or maybe being in nature, or I don't know, drawing a tree for no one else to see but you. But whatever that is that gives you a break from your creative endeavor, or maybe doing a different creative endeavor than what you're used to. For those of us who don't do creative things as part of our main job, a creative rest for us could be engaging in a hobby. It could be learning how to paint, draw, or if you already know that, doing it. So finding your own way to work with your creativity, giving yourself a break from whatever your norm is. We use our creativity a lot as ADHD women. We use our creativity to solve problems. Like we are super, I like to say scrappy problem solvers, right? Because we're resourceful. We've had to be. We have a lot of stuff come up. And so it's like, all right, how am I going to get figure this out? And we just figure stuff out. It makes sense in our ADHD brains. So we are very creative, but sometimes to give ourselves a break from that kind of creativity, we can use our creativity in other ways. Mindful coloring can even be an easy one, right? You don't have to go learn how to draw because then that's one more thing, right? You can just get some markers and a color book. They've got so many adult coloring books right now. It's ridiculous. So there's that. All right. So the last time rest that we're going to talk about today is spiritual rest. I'm not talking about religion. Spiritual rest for you may involve your religion, but spiritual rest means connecting with something bigger than yourself. That could be nature. If you believe in some kind of spirit energy or higher power or your loved ones on the other side, if you use the G word, God, whatever it is, giving yourself some space to connect with that energy. That might be meditation or yoga. For some, it might be going to church or praying. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's essential that we're giving ourselves some spiritual rest. This is one I think that's fallen by the wayside a lot lately. And I think the reason is there are a lot of people who have been turned off by religion. And to me, where I sit as a therapist, what I see, and certainly my own journey, is that a lot of us aren't actually turned off by the idea of a higher power or some kind of spirit energy. A lot of us are turned off by the patriarchal influence in it, by the dogma, by the attempts to control, by the things that show up that actually are misaligned with spirit energy, right? The control, the lack of love and compassion, the judgment, stuff like that. So a lot of us have turned off to anything religious, but sometimes in doing so, turned off to things that are spiritual. And I'm not here to judge good or bad. It's just, I've seen it happen in so many people and even in myself for a while. And we can connect with spirituality in many ways. You can go out and be in nature, and that can be a super spiritual experience. You can meditate, you can do yoga. Like I said, for some, going to church. There are lots and lots of ways that we can do that. But our spiritual energy is an important part of our being. You can be an atheist and still find a way to get spiritual rest. And it is so essential. So today we've gone over the 7 types of rest, plus my extra one, which I believe is fun, as well as how to complete the stress response so that we are overcoming burnout. We're keeping ourselves from getting so overwhelmed. We've talked about that word overwhelm. And when we're in true overwhelm versus being stressed, what we actually need is rest. We need nothingness. We need a break from whatever it was we were doing to recover. And that's what rest is all about. I'd love it if you'd comment on your ahas from this podcast. What kind of rest is easy for you? What kind of rest is hard for you? Be sure to follow if you're not already. And of course, please share. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.